here with the Des Moines Register editorial board and Governor Kasich from Ohio. And I'm Lynn Hicks, the editorial page editor of the Register. And we're going to go around and have editorial board introduce themselves.
I'm Clark Kaufman. I'm an editorial writer here at the Register.
Emily Nash, executive editor.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it for the editorial.
All right. Governor, we're going to start out. If you would just tell us briefly why we should consider endorsing you for the nomination.
Well, I think, maybe it doesn't seem as though it's vogue, but I think experience really does matter. And so, you take the 18 years I served in Congress, both as a military reformer. I was involved in so many of the changes, Goldwater Nichols, limiting the production of the B-2, which a number of your congressmen supported, including, as I recall, Jim Leach. Spent 18 years working on national security, defense, reform, all that. And then I'd spent 10 years of my life trying to balance the budget, and then I became the senior Republican, and then I was one of the chief architects, along with Senator Domenici, to actually pull the balanced federal budget. And when I left, we were running a projected $5 trillion surplus, which was no small potatoes. We'd cut the capital gains taxes, and the economy was booming, which was great. Then I went out for 10 years, and then I felt a call back, so I ran for governor, and the state was really a basket case. We'd lost 350,000 jobs. We were 20% of our operating budget was in the hole. Our credit was about to be downgraded, and just a few years later, we've gone from an $8 billion hole to a $2 billion surplus. We've cut taxes by just shy of $5 billion, including basically no income taxes on small business, which is kicking in now. Our credit is strong. Our economy is diversified. We've moved from just basically manufacturing and agriculture to supplementing them or adding to them energy, financial services, medical devices, logistics. It's a different state now. Our credit is rock solid. Our pensions are in good shape, and we're up 380,000 private sector jobs. We've shrunk the size of the government to its lowest level in 30 years by just not replacing people. Our budget is structurally sound. And so you take the formula that I used in Washington, apply it in Ohio, and it's resulted in stronger economics, and I believe that formula can be applied again with discipline and imagination, innovation, and a good team. And then I think the other thing that's important to note is people who lived in the shadows, we do not ignore, whether they're the mentally ill, the drug addicted, or the working poor. Our recidivism rate in our prisons is about half the national average. Our ability to help minorities gain some economic clout has worked. I mean, all these things are scalable really to the federal level. So I've been able to work with people on the other side of the aisle. It's been a conservative agenda. But it's yielded some really significant things, and I think that qualifies me to be able to take the next step.
You mentioned the soapbox speech, which it was a bit of a departure, and you've repeated some of these things on the trail about things about empathy, compassion, healing, justice, uniting with Democrats. Compared with some of the other candidates, it sounds like you're speaking another language. Are you frustrated?
The other thing I said there is we need to live a life greater than ourselves. And if you take a look at the allure of these radical groups, it tends to happen when people feel as though their life has no meaning. It tends to happen when people feel that I can't make a difference. And so I've seen things written since then that have kind of reflected that. And so when you don't have meaning or hope in your life, you start looking for other things. And some people gravitate towards drugs. Some people gravitate towards radical causes. And I think it's important in the West that we communicate that we really truly believe that that your life does matter, that you have to care about more than just yourself. in regard to what I've just said, I think it's been consistent with conservative principles. You know, you all had Jack Kemp come in this room. You know, you had Ronald Reagan in this room. I'm an opportunity guy, and opportunity through economic growth, but if somebody gets left behind, can I get a little coffee? If somebody gets left behind, I think we've got to give them a chance to be able to move up. And it's what's interesting for me is I think tone does matter. And I said, as I said in the debate the other night, we're not going to solve these big problems unless we can work together. You know, somebody who thinks differently as in the other party is clearly not the enemy. I don't have to give my principles, but I have to respect people, even though I may not agree with them.
So, I mean, with the tone of the campaign, how it's been, are you frustrated in trying to get that message out?
You know, I really wouldn't say frustrated, because it's been a good experience. Being on the trail has been, I think, a really good experience. I've really enjoyed coming back here again, because, you know, I was here years ago and found out that as, you know, I was a kid. Did you know that? I tried to run for president.
Oh, yeah, 2000.
Yeah, it wasn't, and I came here, and that was frustrating because I couldn't get anywhere. But then again, I was just a very young congressman, and but it's different this time. You know, it's been much different, and I've enjoyed it, getting reacquainted.
But after that, you were critical of Iowa or the process here.
Well, you know, it was what really bothered me then was that straw poll, and I had to pay for parking spaces or whatever the heck it was, and it didn't have anything to do really with the people that I met here. Although I can remember spending a few hours with a guy with a notebook, and we got done. I said, "Well, how do you think? Can you be for me?" He said, "Well, yeah, if we have 4 or 5 more sessions like this." But I come to realize that's kind of the way it works. You know, you have to acquaint yourself. But I think it was great that they got rid of the straw poll. I think that was a really important thing. And frankly, I couldn't put the resources together. And maybe some of it was, you know, frustration with not being able to have the money. But, you know, I think the system is different today. I'm glad it was changed.
Could you talk a little bit about campaign finance reform and whether or not you think reform is even necessary?
Well, look, I think, first of all, let me get to campaign finance reform. I think we need to do redistricting reform. I think what's happening is we gerrymander people into safe Republican and safe Democrat districts, and then they have to watch the extremes. So they move in an extreme. And then you have to figure out how, once they move to an extreme, because they're always watching over their shoulder, you got to get them back here. Now, good leaders can do that, but I think that whole system needs to change. I think we need to look at major reform of that, and whether I'm president or governor, it's going to be an issue for me. Look, I don't care what the rules are on. When I say I don't care, people give me money, it doesn't make any difference to me. I mean, it's well known in my state that if you give them money, you probably get less than if you don't. I mean, you know, I don't care about that. When I get hired as a CEO. Now, if I could figure out the best finance laws we can have, that we don't have to turn around a year later and say, why did we do that? I'm all for it. I don't like the notion of all this soft money and a handful of billionaires being able to, because they can go on the air. You know, the billionaires give the money, then the candidates have the ability to go on the air and do the air, you know, the campaign from the air. The campaign from the ground is different. That gets funded with hard money, and that's tougher to raise. And you know, some people have said, Warren Rudman has a group, you know, the former senator is now gone, but that maybe we should run this along the lines of smaller contributions. I'm open to it. But I'm a believer that we have term limits in Ohio. They're too short. I believe in term limits. Has it made a big difference? Certainly made a lot of difference to the staff because they're more powerful. So, you know, the question is, how much can mechanical things really change an outcome? And I think mechanics can matter, but character counts more, and leaders who have the capacity to get people to perform above a level where they normally perform. But, you know, a lot of people are bringing this up to me. I think, you know, It's a group of people in New Hampshire in particular where they always come, and I'm willing to look at anything. I just want to make sure it's going to work. And so when I say I don't really care about it, I do care about it, but it isn't going to change the way that I do things, because I've never felt that the people who give me money should get anything other than a vote and an opinion. But that's it.
They still give you money, if they know.
You know, I think because I think that I've proven over time that they can get results. This guy, he's a Democrat. His name's Albert Ratner. He runs this. He's now retired. He's 87 years old, and he runs this group called Forest City. Used to in Cleveland. He had a fundraiser for me, and he got up and he said, "The good news was we raised John a lot of money. The bad news, you're not going to get anything for it." I mean, you just have to check my record. I mean, what I'm telling you here today. I've been around politics for a long, long time, and nobody is going to tell you, oh yeah, because I gave him money, he did something. I mean, you're not going to hear that from anybody. Why do they give? Because some people want to see good results. I mean, they do. I'm sure some people give because they think, well, I could be the first one that could maybe get something for it. But that's not the bulk of them. I mean, and I had this infamous quote, you know, I'll tell you what it was. I was elected governor, and before I was sworn in, I had a big meeting with the lobbying community, and that's where I uttered the statement, because I said we have big problems in this state, and they're going to have to be fixed, and you're going to have to cooperate. It can't all be about your clients. So let me just tell you, either get on the bus or I'm going to run you over with the bus. Okay? It was reported like I had said that to the public. I didn't. I said it to the lobby community. So they have a job to do. I respect their job, and I respect people that will support me, but so what? I mean, how can you seize the moral high ground if you start making deals with people? You can't do it. And so that's the way I've always conducted myself, and it's worked out pretty well.
What would be your approach to working more closely with Democrats?
Respect. You know, I did the budget deal with the Clinton folks. I was involved in welfare reform. In the state of Ohio, we reformed the Cleveland schools. We reformed our transportation infrastructure program. We fought the issue of human trafficking. I mean, a good example of it is this woman, in my first year, I was making a State of the State, and she walked out of the chamber and led a protest against me in the rotunda. A few months later, she wanted to see me, so my staff didn't want to let her in. I said, I'll let the lady in. So she comes in. So what's your problem? She starts telling me about human trafficking in Ohio, which I didn't really know about. I said, how are you doing? Well, you know, she hadn't passed anything. I said, well, why don't we go ahead and pass it? And she sat there. I went, hello? Are you still with me? And she said, you would really do this? Well, we passed it. And we've done a lot of things since then on that issue. I went up to sign the bill in her district. She's hugging me. And then when I run for re-election, she blasts me. So that's life. I've always felt comfortable being able to work with others, and I'm extremely uncomfortable seeing an environment where just because you're in one party or another that somehow we demonize you. You can't, look, Obamacare has been so controversial because no Republicans supported it. If we're going to reform Medicare, if we're going to reform Social Security, if we're going to balance a budget, if we're going to rebuild the military, there's so many things we have to do. You can't just do it with one party. Now, I know on the budget, because I've written so many budgets in my lifetime, that you're not going to get a lot, but you got to get some. You just can't steamroll people. And it's also in the way in which you show respect to them. And look, I work with people that I've disagreed with 98% of the time. Ron Dellums and I were the team that took on the B-2 bomber. Okay, they called us the odd couple. I've always learned from when I was a kid, really, I mean in college, I just learned you got to work with other people. And then as a state senator, I was a chairman. When I got elected 26, at 28, I became a chairman. We won the majority, and the House was Democrat. I mean, I'm not in this stuff to be. I've always said that the Republican Party is my vehicle and not my master, and that's how I feel about it. And I got to respect other people, and over time, it starts to work. And I've seen it. Did I just knock that off? I think I did. Uh-oh. Snafu.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the way. it's going to take time because the water has been poisoned. But I have friends that are Democrats that say, you know, I tell you, it's so different here. You know, I wish you were here and all that kind of stuff. So you don't have to go along, but you got to get along and give people something when they have a good idea. Talk to them, listen to them. That's really not that hard. The problem is that the wells have been poisoned for a long enough period of time. It's not easy.
You mentioned Obamacare. If I remember correctly, you did use the Affordable Care Act to expand Medicaid in Ohio, but you've also said that the law needs to be repealed.
Well, first of all, you know, Reagan expanded Medicaid, I think, 5 times. And the choice on Medicaid for me was I can get $14 billion and I can treat the mentally ill, the drug addicted, and the working poor. And it ultimately becomes a big saver for me, really, because if I can get the working poor to not be in the emergency room, it saves all of us money. If I can treat the mentally ill and keep them from being in prison, or the drug addicted and get them treated and out of prison and not back, I mean, it's not only helping an individual, but it's ultimately going to work to our benefit, and it has. Our recidivism rate for drug addicts in prison, once we treat them and hand them off to the community, is less than 20%. I mean, we're seeing great results there. In terms of Obamacare, look, I mean, I believe the answer ultimately is to take some of the federal resources, send them to the states along with their Medicaid dollars, and if the states want to add some resources, up to them, and that is a program that can ensure the working poor. I would reduce the number of mandates in health insurance so that I would lower the cost of health insurance. And but I don't want, you know, millions of people to lose insurance coverage. And I think what I'm talking about is a state-by-state way in which we can solve that. Now, I don't think that's where it ends, however. And let me give you an example. We're working on this aggressively. There are other states doing it. It's very scalable. We know what it costs for hip surgery. We basically know if you take a specialist that does hip surgery, we know what the mean costs are. We know those that are higher than the mean and those who are lower at the mean. We're actually working to say if you're lower than the mean and you have good quality, we're going to put that money in your pocket. So we want to drive a whole different way of thinking about healthcare, which is really the incentive on keeping people healthy rather than treating them when they're sick. Our next step, and we're working with all the major hospitals and insurance companies because this is where this is all going to go if we can avoid the issue of rationing. The thing that's interesting is I don't want to run this. I can run this in Medicaid and force this kind of change, but I'm finding that by convening meetings, we can actually get the private sector to do it. Let me give you one other example. In Columbus, the children's hospitals work with the insurance company. The children's hospital has established protocols to keep kids from going into the hospital because there are many kids who have asthma that don't have to end up in the hospital. If kids don't go to the hospital, hospitals make less money. Insurance companies make more. They split the difference. So that's the way we want to start thinking about health care because I want to avoid rationing because we know what happens when you ration. The powerful get the care and those who are not, like my dad who was a mailman, he'd be the guy that get the shaft. And so I want to make sure it works. But I don't think you can just repeal something without having a very good alternative to that because you don't want to all of a sudden have a lot of people that don't have any health insurance. And I think I know my plan will work because of the things that we've done inside of Medicaid where we reduced the Medicaid costs from 10% growth in my second budget to 2.5%. And without cutting anybody off the rolls or reducing benefits.
So you talked about ending some of the mandates. So which parts of Obamacare would you make sure that are preserved?
Well, you'd want to go through all the different mandates on whether, you know, an 18-year-old or somebody who's very old needs to have maternity care, things like that. I mean, I would go through. I mean, I have the way I work is I get the smartest people with the least amount of conflict. And I say, what do you think we should do? So there are a lot of mandates in that insurance, and I would have to sit down with my folks who run these programs and say, okay, which things do you think should be kept, which things should not? And I mean, I'd have to get you a list, but I don't have a list in front of me. But there's too many mandates, which has driven up the cost. So if you talk to people who are buying insurance, they'll tell you that their insurance costs have dramatically escalated. So it's because it's a one-size-fits-all mentality, and that's what I would like to reduce and not have these kind of mandates on. And Ohio has a very robust insurance industry, by the way, and they compete, and it's a good thing.
There's been a lot of talk about gun control lately for obvious reasons. What sort of legislation, if any, would you support on gun control?
I think you need to make sure that the states are actually uploading the mentally ill reports, and many of them do not. Somebody told me that one state, reported like 2 of their whole state. So I think that's very, very important. And I think, you have to enforce the laws that we have on the books. I am a Second Amendment advocate because I've concluded that people do have a right to protect themselves. But I would enforce the laws on the books, and I would demand that we do something on this issue of mental illness. And then somebody asked me the other day about the no-fly list. I said, if you scrub the no-fly list down and you gave people an opportunity to, have some due process, I wouldn't have those folks with guns. So, but I was on The View a couple times, a second time with a discussion of this, and I think the issue is deeper than the gun. And when you take a look at the mother of one of the shooters, she said, I knew my son had problems, I didn't have anywhere to turn, I didn't know where to go. And so I think, okay, what's happened to the family? Where are the siblings? Where's the community? Where is everybody? It's like, as we get more and more, this is sort of back to the soapbox, as we get more and more isolated from one another, bad things potentially can happen. So I think we need to also look at the underlying social causes of this. In the state, one of the reasons, you might remember Craig Deeds, he ran for governor, I think he was lieutenant governor of Virginia, tried to put his son in a hospital, and there was no room. And that's the next day where his son died and he was attacked. We've expanded emergency beds in the state of Ohio. I think, mental health is a big issue in the country, and you're going to have to spend some money on it.
So, 94, you voted for the assault weapon ban. Are you open to doing that again, or are you changing?
No, because I don't believe the law had any real effect.
It didn't do anything.
I don't think so. And I don't want to put laws on that I think are not effective. And, I watched that. I watched the whole way in which that worked, and I concluded that it just wasn't effective. And I also don't really want to communicate to people that I want to take their guns away.
So what exactly can you do to try to reduce mass shootings and gun violence?
Well, I think part of it is what I'm talking about in terms of mental health issues,
How would you
structure of the.
tackle that?
I would force the states to do what they're supposed to do now, which is we need to have an uploading of this data so that when people do the background checks, we're not selling guns to people who have mental illness. But I also think practically about what you do now. I mean, there are so many guns in the U.S., you're not going to go around taking people's guns away. Enforce the laws, make it tough, deal with the problem of mental illness, and try as a community to do more and more so that people have somewhere to turn when they feel like they got nowhere to go. That's what I would do.
But with regard to the background checks, isn't it still an issue if you have people buying a gun at a gun show without a background check?
Well, you do have a responsibility to check who it is you're selling a gun to, and we ought to make sure they exercise that responsibility.
Has Ohio done all of those things, uploaded the information into the federal database?
Yeah, we try to do our job there. And it's a good question that I will ask again.
On your balanced budget plan, you're going to transfer responsibility for Medicaid, welfare, and highway construction funding to the states?
Yeah, let's talk
So
about the highways a little bit if you want to hear
Okay,
that. You
okay.
know, right now, we tax ourselves and send money to Washington, to these committees, and then they usually send less back. So what I say is, stop that program. Send a couple pennies to Washington to maintain the interstate, and let the states keep the money so that if they want to they want to tax themselves to do more infrastructure, the money stays there. It doesn't go somewhere else. This has been voted on now several times down there. I think it's a really good, really good idea. And I think as president, most people would like it. There are states that get money, right? So maybe you leave another penny in there or something to work that out in a transition. But I think that in my state, infrastructure is going great. And the more that I can keep what I have in the state, you want to toll right now, you can't toll on a road that has federal dollars in it unless you build another lane. I'm not for that. I mean, it's stupid. If you want to toll, toll. So I think that's one thing I would do. On Medicaid, all the states, now, you wouldn't be able to take Medicaid money and just spend it on highways. I mean, there'd be guardrails there that you would have to spend it for the purposes of which, it's being sent to you. Education, we have 104 federal programs. I'd like to bundle it up in 4 and send that out to the states. Because I think that's what the 10th Amendment is. And then as a president, I went into the House chamber and I walked up to where a president of the United States would speak. And I looked out across that chamber, to tell you the truth, feeling extremely comfortable with that. And I think it's the job of a president to talk about best practices. I think it's the job of the states to be laboratories of experimentation. And then I think at the same time, what that does is it reduces the workload of the federal government. And I want to tell you, there have been 2 cases. The most recent one I don't really want to get into because I yesterday talked to the administration. But we had an issue we thought was serious in Ohio. All I got was voicemail. I couldn't get anybody to answer the phone down there. And when we had the problem with Ebola, I went through the same thing. The federal, and this is not some ideological diatribe here. Things are just broken down there. And I think if we can reduce the responsibility, then I think, and let the states assume more responsibility with guardrails around these programs, I think we'll see more innovation, more creativity, and maybe a somewhat more efficient federal government doing the things that government's supposed to do. I did some of this, back in '97 with Medicaid, welfare. Welfare, these rules are still, you got to go to Washington to ask them to change the rules, and some of the rules really don't make sense. For example, if you go and get training towards a degree, you don't get full credit under the work rules. I mean, and I have to ask them, would you give me a waiver on that? I don't think I should have to do that.
So help me understand where the savings, because you were calling for tax cuts, but this would also, by shifting these burdens to the states.
Well, we would freeze all non-defense discretionary. My plan is this. It's a 1-year freeze, and this is where we get to be about the reasonableness of proposals. It's a 1-year freeze on all federal regs, with exception for health and safety, and then a Congress that has to vote on regulations over $100 million, and we would create entities like we have in Ohio, where if you have a problem with a regulator, you can go to an advocate who has an interface with the regulator but is not the regulator, is independent. So you have an ability to affect regulations, because I think that's one of the things that's driving Americans crazy are all these regulations, and they can't, small business, they can't go sue anybody, it's a problem. That's one piece. The other piece is the tax plan. The tax plan is, it's the Reagan plan at 28%, 25, and 10. It's capital gains at 15. And on the corporate side, I think it's 5 or 6% tax on all the money that would come back now, and then no double taxation, the territory approach. And then expensing, be able to write everything off in a year, because I want plant and equipment investment for productivity purposes and wage growth. And so that's the tax piece. And then the restraining piece of government is Medicare going from 7 to 5, using a number of the approaches that we've used in Medicaid, Medicaid going from 5 to 3, a freeze on non-defense discretionary, and shifting some of those programs out, which wouldn't help us to do that, and then also a $100 billion increase in defense. We say it would get us to a balance in year 8, You know, if you do it, you probably will get there much faster. But it is a honest, realistic, I think largely doable program. What's the most doable? The corporate tax side. I think you could pass that. I also think that when I talk about these changes, you know, for example, to Medicaid and Medicare and the discretionary freeze, accommodating, of course, everything's not frozen. Some things can go up, but the overall freeze, you know, because I would be for more money for NIH. I think it's a reasonable, realistic proposal. And I do believe that once you lay it down, I think that you will get to balance faster, start running surpluses and paying down debt. And why do I do all that? Because that is the way in which you create stability and predictability for businesses.
What about on the Social Security side? Have you?
Well, you know, I had a plan back many years ago to fix it, which would have gone to the prices versus prices and wages, and given young people a 2% private account funded out of the projected $5 trillion surplus, and they didn't do anything. So you know, go to the doctor 15 years ago, and he says you got a problem, and you show up 15 years later and say, okay, now what are we going to do, doctor? We believe that ultimately you can go to the, you know, the prices and not the prices and the wages, but what you're going to have to do, and I don't have the numbers yet, is high-income seniors are going to get less. Now, the high income, it would have to start very soon, because that'll balance it out. So if you have, and I don't want to, I'll give you a number. No, I don't want to give you a number because we're on camera here. But what I would tell you is we're talking higher income seniors, people who are getting earnings in excess of a certain amount, would then have their benefits scaled back, so that others would be able to get their benefits. I think it's pretty darn reasonable approach. Now, you're not going to get that done unless you bring some Democrats on. And then the question gets to be, you know, what ultimately do they want? But this is pretty good. And I had my guys working on it, but they don't have all the numbers put together yet.
What about raising retirement age or other?
You know, the retirement age is going up to like 67 now. And I think that in my last conversation with them, as they've looked at this, they think that what I'm talking about now with the prices and with this impact on higher income seniors, that's what you need to do, and there's not much else.
And when you say prices, you're talking about
Well, right now
same
they index
cost of
it with prices and wages,
Right.
and you should just do it with prices, not prices and wages. That starts the initial benefit at a lower level.
Is it fair to say you're still opposed to same-sex marriage?
Yeah, but I mean, it's not really an issue. The court has ruled. Yeah, I'm a traditional marriage guy, but you know, I think you were probably read. I went to my first same-sex marriage, and you know, it's behind us now. The court has ruled, and that's the way it goes.
Well, what role does government play, though, in terms of prohibiting discrimination against people based on sexual orientation?
We in the state, we don't want that discrimination to be there. I mean, that's what we've done. I don't believe in discrimination, period.
But does Ohio prohibit discrimination on employment and housing?
In our government,
In the state government?
in the state government. Yeah, I issued an
But not in the
executive
private
order.
sector?
private accommodations.
No.
What, is that because?
I don't know if there's an issue. You know, I really don't. I mean, I did what I could do with an executive order, and I can't executive order the private sector. That would have to be something that would pass the legislature.
Yeah. Is that something you'd support?
Well, I mean, I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think the legislature is going to do that. But I'm not for discrimination. So if somebody were to ask me, what do you think? Well, you are asking me. I'm telling you, I don't think we should discriminate.
It doesn't sound like you're going to lead the charge on that one, though, is what I'm.
Well, look, lead the charge. I'm going to lead the charge on about a zillion different things. And if I thought there was a major problem, you know, my view on somebody says, well, I don't want to make a cupcake for somebody, I tell them, you know, if you're in the business of commerce, make a cupcake. I mean, let's not get, the only thing I get concerned about is when you start telling private churches, churches themselves, religious institutions, what they have to do. I don't favor that, but I'm not in favor of.
But nobody, the court has
That's
said
not, but
that's not
nobody's,
an issue.
yeah, and look, I don't have issues in the state. So I don't need to be making a law, to do something that I don't see a law needs to be made. If I began to see very serious problems, I'd have to deal with it. What I've been dealing with lately, beyond the budget and all the capital bill that's coming and all that, is, I've been very concerned about the urban situation in terms of violence. So I created a task force made up of Republicans and Democrats to be a good example of this. I have a lady who is my co-chairperson of this, who is a really hardcore liberal Democrat. I love this lady. And she ran for statewide election, lost. I appointed her to be the co-chairperson with our former head of the Highway Patrol, who's now the head of public safety, and created this task force made up of law enforcement, community activists to deal with, this problem of urban unrest. And it's been really, really good. They came back the second day of the Baltimore, it was coincidental, the Baltimore riots, with a whole series of recommendations, two of which have been enacted, one of which is a statewide policy on the use of deadly force, and also a policy on hiring and recruiting. And now we've broken down into a smaller group to do a collaborative where you get police and community actually, each of them understanding each other's problems, challenges, and difficulties. This is important because we have a case coming out soon in Cleveland that involves the shooting of a 12-year-old who had a gun, and police, it's a lot of stuff. And part of it is they never got the warning about who, the dispatcher never kind of told them what they were going to face, and it's a mess. So I have to think about that. I have to think about the cost of higher education. I've got a zillion things I have to think about. So leading the charge is, I have to pick and choose what I'm going to lead the charge on, and that's not one where I'm leading any charge, unless I saw a problem somewhere that was real and not isolated.
What about higher education? How would you address college affordability?
Well, I brought in a task force of people who are business people to look at cost drivers. And there's a lot to say here. First of all, we need to make sure that our high schools are able to offer college credit to students. And we're now seeing some students who are almost completing a full year of school. Secondly, I encourage the use of community colleges, that you can go for 2 years, and now we're trying to push on the third year, so you do 3 years, then you go to the fourth. That has not been, it's in the index of our report, but definitely you should be able to get College Credit Plus and be able to go to the community colleges. In addition to that, we have this group that's looked at all the non-academic programs that universities have. So at Ohio State, the president of the university a few years ago leased the parking garages and surface garages for $500 million, and he was fought in that. People didn't want him to do that, which is bizarre to me. So I think we need to start thinking about what is the central role of higher education. Why do they have dining rooms, dormitories, parking garages? Shed yourself of that and focus on your core mission of education. Then it's also critically important that when somebody goes to college that they have a sort of a guardian angel, somebody, a counselor to help them go through the process. And we also have said in Ohio, we're not going to pay you unless kids complete courses or graduate, because we want students to graduate quicker and not have the universities keeping them around where they get paid. The other problem we have is remedial education, something that needs to be fixed at the K through 12 level, because remedial education is really, really expensive at the higher education level. Look, at the end of it all, I've told public and private schools, if you do not begin to control these costs, you're going to be disintermediated. People are not going to pay this money. You're going to see an online enterprise that can combine the education with some sort of a real college experience, which we all loved in this room, and it's going to be at a fraction of the cost. And I would prefer not to see that happen. But, you know, my understanding here is you have an IBM executive who's trying to run Iowa. I don't know, he's had all this trouble. Is it because he wants to change things, cut costs? I don't know. But I think these are really serious matters. Now, for those that have the debt, I kind of look at two areas. One would be you can offer employers an incentive to help a student pay down that debt as a way to recruit. And the second thing is I would be open to some sort of real public community service where you could work off some of that debt. In addition to that, we need to impose tougher standards on graduate students because graduate students ring up big chunks of this debt, and many of them with no expectation of ever repaying it. So it's a problem. I mean, it's really a challenge. So we're dealing with it now in our state. You know, like Ohio State, I don't think they've raised their tuition. We don't permit the tuition raises, but I've developed a really, really good relationship with our higher education community. I don't blindside them. I don't slash their budgets. I work with them. We had a capital bill. I said, look, I'm going to give you a capital bill, but everybody doesn't get a slice of the pizza. I want you to get together, and I want you to tell me who you're going to prioritize and why. But everybody doesn't get money. If everybody wants to have money, we're just not going to have a capital bill. They did exactly what I asked. I said we want to have a rule that says you don't get paid money unless kids are completing courses and graduating. They went along with it. I told them, I said, I don't want any student to walk into a community college or a four-year school without having somebody that tells them what the in-demand jobs are, what it takes to get one, what the pay is, and I will help you complete your course to get a degree. And they're all beginning to do it. And those that aren't, I talked to them about a capital bill. So, you know, I'm really, really, really proud of the relationship I have with higher education. Gordon Gee, who's now at West Virginia University, he was the guy that I started working with when he was president of Ohio State. And he created really a lot of this relationship. We're extremely close. And through that whole process, I became very aware of the issue of leverage and friendliness. Guys, do you see what I do? You asked me at the beginning, why do I want to be president? Think about all this that we're doing. I know how to do these things. This is why I decided to run. I mean, I've only been a candidate for 5 months. It took me a long time to decide it because I didn't want to waste my time. But just say I don't win. What would I be doing if I were sitting at home on my couch, not offering this level of experience and ability to solve problems? This is why I'm doing this. And I will never have to look back. And I'm not going to try to get elected by doing, you know, wild things. I'm not going to do it. But look, whether it's the issue of race, whether it's the issue of higher education, K through 12, balancing budgets, cutting taxes, bringing people together, national security issues, you know, I mean, I don't say this, and the ability to assemble a good team, I don't say this because I'm some great, great guy. I just know how to do it, and I've been doing it for a long time with really good results. And then, you know, in Ohio with my re-election, I mean, it was unbelievable. You know, I won 86, look, I got 26% of the African-American vote, 51% of union households, 60% of women, the 30-plus point win, and they say, well, I had a weak opponent. Yeah, I had a weak opponent because they couldn't get a strong opponent. So, you know, I just want you to know that I offer this up as service. I mean, that's why I'm doing this. And we can go all day long talking about this program and that program. The thing I have to tell you is that I have good people, and I tell them, go do your job and keep me informed. But I probably discount myself more on being a micromanager. I'm really not a micromanager, but I do want to know the programs. So if you ask me, well, how did you take Medicaid from 10 to 2.5? I can tell you, but I'm nowhere near the knowledge of the people who do it. And what I found is when you have a cabinet and you tell people, go do your job, they'll do it. And what I try to tell them is if you're honest and working hard, I'll stand behind you. You know, you wouldn't believe the changes we've made on drugs. You know, we have such a comprehensive program of shutting down pill mills, of taking licenses away from doctors because I strengthened our medical board, which had never been strong before. You know, what we do with the schools, instead of informing parents and school administrators, we now have protocols on both acute and ongoing problems. You know, and we've also changed the laws around, or changed the situation around emergency rooms, so you can't doctor shop, you can't shop emergency rooms. I mean, all these things are happening. Taking people who are developmentally disabled, giving them an opportunity to be mainstreamed. I mean, the list goes on, and problem I have is there's too much to talk about, and I'm just going to glaze over your eyes, but I'm just telling you.
I'd like to ask you about one program.
Yeah.
I was talking to Governor Branstad last night. He wanted me to ask you about ethanol. And you may have seen the polling that we had out today in today's paper about
I didn't.
both parties.
I didn't see the polling. I didn't see the paper
Big
today.
majority support ethanol in the RFS. What's if you're president, what happens to the RFS?
Can I put my hands behind my back and you can take me prisoner into another room? Let me just be square with you. I was never for the subsidies, okay? And then I became governor. And I had a really interesting conversation with somebody. I said, you know, we can reduce the workforce here. And they said, well, if you fire people and you have an unemployment problem, then all you're doing is aggravating the unemployment problem. That doesn't make sense. So, look, we have ethanol in Ohio. There are a lot of people connected to it, and they're working. And so I think we have these things in place. The subsidy's gone, and I don't see any reason to disrupt it. I mean, it goes into effect until like 2022 or something like that. Is that when it is? And so my sense is you don't need to go picking fights where there's one not to be picked. And frankly, I am for diversity in all of our energy sources. I had a big battle with the legislature, and I make nobody happy on this one. Our legislator sent I think it was a 25% target goal on alternative energy. We can't meet it. We're not capable of meeting it. We'd have to buy power out of state. So I said, okay, we'll rework the numbers. And they said, well, why don't we not rework the numbers? We'll just freeze the whole program. And I said, no. If you freeze the program, I'm sticking to 25% back in. So we'll see where this works out. Because I'm now in it's like I'm not going to let them freeze the program if I have to impose the 25%. So, I mean, I believe in these alternative fuels, and I think they're really important, and so I would see no reason to disrupt that. So count me in as not, you don't need to worry about me.
What's your position on climate change?
Well, I've said that I think humans affect it, but really I had a really good conversation with my head of EPA in Ohio, who actually small business people really like, and which is amazing. We should have been on this a long time ago. We should have been on efficiency and developing renewables. We didn't. So no, I think we have to be careful that we are not overreacting and putting a bunch of people out of work. I can't tell you the degree to which humans affect climate, but we've reduced our emissions in the state by, I think it's 30% over the last 10 years. You know how I feel about renewables. I feel strongly about, actually people wanted to walk away from the efficiency standards. I'm like, we're not doing that. What are you kidding? We spend a whole generation teaching people about efficiency, and now we're not going to do it? Of course we're going to do it. So I think, look, if you got coal, you got to clean it before you burn it. I'm for developing natural gas. I'm for nuclear. I'm for solar. I'm for wind. I'm for all these things. And let's not disrupt our economy on the basis of imposing standards that are not realistic, not practical, and would create real economic problems. In other words, job loss. So, I think we have to be sensitive about the environment. I have been. I had a bill, give you one example of it. Early on, before I probably learned to communicate as effectively as I could, or my administration didn't, we had a bill to permit a water withdrawal from Lake Erie. And every single Republican in the legislature voted for it, and I vetoed it because it was going to affect the small streams. Now, I just had a near war on the issue of fertilizer being placed on frozen ground, because that's what causes the algae blooms. And I was just going to be able to take some actions that would have gotten pretty much what I wanted, but I convinced the legislature to work together, and the environmental community and the agriculture community came together for the resolution that we had. It was really pretty remarkable. So, you know, sort of back to that issue of how do you deal with people that are not like-minded. I mean, it's just a matter of you got to work through stuff. And sometimes, sometimes you have to call people and you have to tell them in no uncertain terms what it is you're going to do or not do. And sometimes you do it, sometimes you have other people do it. It's a skill that you learn over time.
I'll ask you a little bit about foreign affairs. You made the comment the other night about punching Russia in the nose. How do you do that?
Well, I think we need to arm the Ukrainians. Secondly, Finland and Sweden now are very nervous, and we need to reassure them. Even they're actually, Finland, believe it or not, is nervous about Russia. So are the Baltics, and I think you need to reposition equipment. I noticed the other day that there are some countries now that are willing to boost their defense spending. I also don't think, as I said, I don't think you need to make Russia an enemy, but Russia needs to understand no more incursions. You're not going to invade a NATO country. If you do, you are causing you're causing a major conflict with us. So I think it's just firm talk, but I don't think it has to be, you don't have to create an enemy. Same thing with China. They don't have to be made into an enemy, but they need to understand the ramifications of not only cyber attacks, but also the issue of the South China Sea. And I was reading just yesterday about the Chinese warning people not to fly. I mean, this is a big part of commerce in the Western Pacific. And so we don't have to make them into an enemy either, but we have to be firm about it. And so that's how I would give them a little tap on the nose. It'd be more than a tap.
And as far as fighting ISIS, you're calling, how many troops are we talking that you're?
Well, look, I mean, you got to understand that for people that have never done this, they may try to give you an answer. That's not the job of a commander-in-chief. The commander-in-chief says, we're going to go. Give me a battle plan. Now, who do you put in the room to draw up the battle plan? You put the saluting guy and the guy over here that's a little different. You put the civilian over here who's the saluting guy, and you put the guy over here, or the woman, doesn't matter, who's different. And you say, give me a couple plans. Give me 2 or 3. Let me look at them. And then you hammer it out. And then that's how you arrive at your strategy, your troop level. And you have to have a difference of opinion in that room. And you have to develop, when I say a consensus, what I mean by that is you kind of know where you want to go. I'll give you an example. I decided I was going to utilize the value of our turnpike. And everybody was up in arms over this because you don't really need to know why. They just love their turnpike. So they brought me, we hired somebody and they brought me 3 choices. You can either sell it, you could lease it, or you could bond against it. Meeting was scheduled for 2 hours. In 5 minutes, I knew what we were going to do. We were going to bond against it. We got an extra $1 billion to fix the highways. I mean, that's not a perfect illustration, but you want to get people in a room, and as an executive and as a leader, you know where you want to go, and after looking at the alternatives and hearing everybody out, you then make the choice.
Well, I understand that those who give specific numbers may, that may not be realistic. But don't you think that voters want to know, when you talk about putting boots on the ground, how many, like how deep are you talking about?
Oh, I'm not just talking about special forces. I'm talking about combat troops. I mean, I'm hid for this. I've been talking.
Are this indefinite engagement? Or
No. I don't want to have look, I've had a long history of voting on these issues. I voted in 1983 against U.S. involvement in Lebanon. I was one of a handful of Republicans to vote against it. I don't believe in getting in the middle of civil wars. I do not believe that our troops should be involved in toppling Assad, but I do believe our troops should be involved in destroying ISIS. But I see it pretty much like a first Gulf War coalition. And you notice the Saudis now have arranged, I don't know, 30, 35, 37 countries as part of an anti-terror coalition. That should be immediately adopted on our side. And, of course, we've got to get our allies in Europe to participate. And one of the things that has to be done is we need to have an aggressive effort over time to pull Turkey towards the West and not towards the East. I made a speech at the Council on Foreign Relations, laid out everything, including about 30 minutes of Q&A, which you ought to see it, okay? Because it has been praised as the most in-depth foreign policy review by anybody running for president. I mean, these are big-time people there. So, no, I would go and I would destroy them. In Syria, I would support the rebels, which I had said we should have done like 2 years ago. The Saudis are willing to settle things in Syria. You might remember me talking about settling it down once Assad's gone. I was talking, I don't think anybody understood, about the Shia Crescent, where Iran, you understood it. Good, somebody understood it. We don't want to have that Shia Crescent, and there's a way in which people can be arranged there. In Iraq, you know, to me, I said the other night, if he didn't have weapons of mass destruction, there's no way I go to Iraq, because I always actually, is one area where I've agreed with Biden. I always thought Sunni, Shia, and Kurds were going to have to live separately. And then when I look at the Kurds we have to figure that out without getting Turkey, because Turkey doesn't like talk about the Kurds, but there's got to be a place for the Kurds to be. Maybe it's not a state, maybe it's a commonwealth, a confederation, I don't know. But I would be there and destroy them, and then also, of course, intelligence cooperation worldwide with people that are civilized, and then here at home, making sure that the Joint Terrorism Task Forces have the resources and the tools they need, particularly in the area of encryption. And we have to also provide defense on the issue of cyber attacks. So I wouldn't be there. I don't believe America ought to be policemen of the world, but I think we have a responsibility to lead, and I think there's certain places where we have to invest our people, which is tough, but I think we have to do it.
How do you try to keep potential terrorists out of the country or prevent people from being radicalized here?
Well, I think the visa program, the K-1, and the whole business of visa waiver, I mean, I think Congress is actually beginning to look at it, which is really good. In terms of here, you know, you have the Joint Terrorism Task Forces, which are headed by the FBI and contain law enforcement, including troopers, state troopers, sheriffs. They are very good at doing their job. I think we have to have a more expansive view of the social media, where apparently, you know, the Homeland Security is not looking at social media postings, which I think you want to look for red flags. That's what you want to do. I mean, I have a guy that's the heads my detail who used to be on the task force, and he's not wearing a bunch of stars, but he knows more about this than a lot of people. And he says we have to look for red flags. We have to, you know, whether it's family, whether it's neighborhood, we have to be able to be tipped off because we're engaged in human intelligence. And I think that's the way you have to think about the Joint Terrorism Task Force and what we have here at home. And the problem of encryption is a difficult one. And the question is, you know, apparently I've been recently informed that you can hear them, you just can't tangle the data gets tangled up. So the question is it possible? They have to work this out. And I mentioned the other night, you need to have the technology companies, the executive and leadership figuring it out, because it's extremely complicated and you got to get cooperation with everybody. The tech companies won't like a discussion about this, but they have to.
So on another subject, you mentioned before you're not going to do anything wild to try to get elected, but how do you stand out? How do you get more traction as we get closer to the caucus?
Well, I think do better here than we are. You know, it's Mary Ann's here with me, and everybody says if I could just come here more, we would do well. There's only so much of me to go around, which makes a lot of people happy, and So we'll spend more time here. And then New Hampshire with, 1.2, 1.3 million, we have the best organization in the state. And if I do well there, that'll be the end of it. I mean, I think we've launched.
But if you don't do well there,
Well, it depends.
then you're done. Is it?
Well, obviously, I'm not going to go on and take people, I got people sleeping on mattresses, heating their food on hot plates. Let's see how it goes, and then I'll call you, okay?
Okay.
I mean, I don't want to make a Sherman-esque, well, this or that, but it has to be a realistic effort. I mean,
As long as you call me and not the union leader, yeah.
well, I guess that can be determined here in the next couple weeks. We covered a lot of stuff, haven't we?
Any final thoughts from you?
I don't know what else there is to cover. I'm just amazed that Iowa State has got these basketball teams. That's fantastic. They're in the top 5, and we were talking outside. I was really, really happy to see I didn't know the football team was that good. They did really.
No one did.
They did really. What was the final in that? Can we turn this off? What was the final?
The Iowa-Michigan State.
Yeah, what was that final?
17-14?
So it was really close again.
Oh, it came down to one.
I was at home with a graduate of Michigan who runs my economic program, and his wife and my wife and I, we were sitting watching the end of the Michigan game. And my John Miner, who runs this, he looks at us all and he says, well, I hope they at least can punt the ball. And in real time, we saw that play. Was that just not the most amazing thing? And this is what Michigan State's done all year. It's unbelievable. So we'll see. Anyway,
So you're saying we should be seeing more of you in the next 7
well,
weeks,
we're working
6
through
weeks?
it. Yeah, I mean, I have to be here. Look, I mean, it gets to be, we're sort of back to this question, a matter of resources, okay? We got well funded in the soft money, but not some of these numbers, because I'm pretty clear about how I feel about it with people in terms of, I want you to help me, but that's sort of the end of the game. On the hard money side, it's really hard. I mean, you have to constantly raise the money. And so it's resources. We have, how many we have on the ground here, Marion? You and Corey? 3. And I'd like to be here more. I mean, I came here the day after the debate because it worked. I was just here, I don't remember. I don't remember where I am from day to day. I'm all over the place.
But you've decided that, I mean, for bang for your buck, New Hampshire's probably better because it's an open primary and it's more friendlier to moderates.
It's not that. It's that it's really kind of the number and the geographic concentration. I mean, it's only 1.2, I think it's 1.2 million.
Yeah.
And you're well over 3. So, I mean, it's just, and you're spread. I mean, it's a whole,
Yeah.
like what's his name? Not what's his name, but Governor Branstad told me, well, you got to visit all 99 counties, okay? And I got that, but I don't have enough time to visit all. And I didn't really know that I was going to do this. Can we turn that off now? Because I'll tell you some other things, okay?
We're on the record.
Well, can we go off the record if I tell you? Or we can't? Okay.
I think we got I don't think we have too many people in the room.
Yeah, we're not.
Well, I
can tell.
can trust you, but I don't want to be, okay, never mind then, we won't. But I'll tell you privately. But I mean, it took me a long time to decide because I wasn't going to run if I didn't think I could raise the money and whether I could compete, to tell you the truth. And there were some things I looked at. And when it became clear to me, no, there was an opportunity after much discussion, then you all remember, he won't get in. If he gets in, he won't have the money. If he won't get on the debate stage, he'll, now they say, oh, well, he's going to drop out. I don't have an intention of dropping out. And I would like to, look, if we could figure out how to add more days to the calendar, I would be delighted to have each one of those added days spent here, So I've just arranged for Mary Ann and Brent, the former speaker, Sechrist, to have a conversation with my staff to say, okay, what do we need to do well, to do better? How much time do we have? Because it's hard. I'm being honest with you, you know? But it was not Iowa because, you know, New Hampshire's more moderate. You should have been in my town hall last night. It was one of the most liberal town halls I've ever been to. It wasn't that at all. It's spread out. There's many media markets here. And then there, it's just so concentrated. But we're putting resources here, South Carolina, Nevada. I'm on the ballot now in over half the states, which is really something. I mean, Virginia, we collected 8,000 signatures. You need 5,000. We didn't pay a person. So, you know, we have stuff going in Illinois and Michigan. I mean, it's big. But at some point, inevitably, I have to be able to move up. Why am I not high in national polls? Because I did a good job. How many people come to Columbus, Ohio to do a big story on the governor when things are going well? I mean, we've had our stories, but not the concentrated media people get who are in the New York media market or in Washington. You know, you just don't get that kind of level of attention. So if this was going to be a regional primary, I wouldn't have run, because I never spent my time trying to figure out how to run for president. I just didn't do it. When the election came, I'll tell you what really was a big part of this. Once I was elected, I then focused on, I remember election night, I said, I don't have to do this stuff anymore. I don't have to raise any more money. I mean, maybe a little bit for a couple projects here or there, and I don't have to do any of this. And then I went out pushing a constitutional amendment to balance the federal budget, which I think we desperately need. And I went out to, first place I went was Arizona. It was an interesting visit. Not like, you know, okay, I had to run for president. Then I went to 6 states, North Dakota, South Dakota, Utah, Idaho, Montana, and it was in the winter. And there were like a lot of people saying, well, you know, you ought to run for president. I thought, you know, it doesn't mean anything. And then I went to South Carolina, and I had a reception in South Carolina that turned my head. People were interested. I mean, when I ran the last time, the only way I would get on television if I broke into a grocery store or something, you know, and they showed me getting in the paddy wagon. But this was different. And then I went to New Hampshire, and that's kind of the process. It took a long time to decide. And so I'm not going to waste people's time if I don't think I can win. But look, I'm very, very bullish on organizations, and if I become the story, that's what I need. I have to become a story. Then the poll numbers go up, and then the money's easier, and you're off to the races. I mean, it's like McCain, right? McCain was like bankrupt and zero, and, you know, he became the nominee. So we'll see.
Speaking of debate stage, where did you think you did well the other night? What messages did you not get across that you were hoping to?
I felt that the other night it was a different situation. It was almost like the first debate where I felt it was controlled. And most of the time, people played by the rules. The other ones, you know, the rules didn't matter. I mean, people just did what they wanted to do, and you have to fight for time, and I don't like that process. Look, I like this. This is where I'm comfortable. But I thought that, you know, I showed a depth of knowledge and a likability that I thought was important. I mean, I didn't analyze it all, but I think we did well. I mean, everywhere I've gone, people have been very complimentary, so we'll see. We got about 2 or 3 more, I think. I don't know. I haven't counted them all.
You were also didn't confront Mr. Trump as much either this last time, did you?
Well, I didn't confront him because there wasn't, I mean, this was a national security debate. It was different, and I've said more about Donald Trump than anybody in the field, and I think I've made it comfortable for other people to have their say about him. But I've said more, and it's not about him. I don't want to get into personal stuff. It's these ideas that, look, I've been on more national television shows talking about, you know, his views on the Muslims, Hispanics, women, developmentally disabled reporter. I mean, I've done enough of that, and I may do it again if I feel the spirit to do it.